So this is really meant to be a conversation, and we're going to show some videos and walk through some projects. But I did want to start with a quote that I often think about, and especially in thinking about Lifeworld, from your 2006 book, Your Engagement Has Consequences, on the relativity of your reality, which feels very apt for New York and for the launch of Lifeworld. And that is, everything is in motion, with a faster or slower speed, and everything is colored by intentionality. Now that you and the entire Studio Olafur Eliasson team have launched Lifeworld in Kurfürstendamm and in Berlin, in Piccadilly Circus, now in New York, also in Seoul, and tomorrow at 11:57 p.m. in Times Square. Can you give the audience a sense of the material conditions of the work?
Yeah, so tomorrow night there's the opening 11:57 in Europe. It's like just 5 minutes before midnight, right? So what you see is the film I have made with my team on the big screens, all of them, if it goes well. What is the artwork on the other side is not necessarily the big screens. It's also the architecture and the space and the traffic and all the other people. So it's the whole thing that is one piece. And what is on the screen, and now you're here, so you can you're not supposed to really know, is actually a film of the screens taken from where you stand, roughly, right? A few angles, like a few different sort of cuts together. So what you see on the screen is like, hey, this is where I am. This is just the same as where I am, except that it's very, very much out of focus. It's completely blurred. The screens have been blurred, and we can talk about that later, in many different ways. Like, you can get so many different blurs nowadays. But for instance, there's a time blur, right? It shows what was before, it shows what is about to happen. So the screens is just like this gooey stuff, out of focus, completely blurred, slow because it's time blurred. So what you see is essentially what is already there, except it's out of focus on a very particular sculpted, artistic kind of way.
Well, I was going to say, so that, back on I'm very pragmatic as a professor, so I wanted to answer the question, can art transform how we experience public space? And I thought, you've been proving this since 1990, so let's talk about what you see as the fulcrum or pivot points, the way that we conceive the public now, and we think about space differently, and what it means to be transformative 30 years in.
Yeah, so when I was a child, I was fortunate to grow up in Iceland and have a lot of time over. So I wasn't necessarily bored, but I wasn't doing much other than going around in nature. This is not the very condensed version of it. But what happens when you walk around in nature, you start to pay attention to the very little bit of information that is there. And in Iceland, it's particularly nice if you need to go somewhere next summer or in the spring, or Nordic Light. Now is season for Nordic Light. So if you go there, you notice there's no trees, especially not in the mountains or outside of the city. There's no really cows, like in Switzerland, cows everywhere, and small houses and roads and hiking roads. In Switzerland, they have asphalt on the hiking roads in the mountains. So there's nothing like that. So you look at landscape, and that's the point. I will get to the public part. You look at landscape and you go like, I wonder whether this stuff, this mountain-like stony stuff, is it 2 hours or maybe 2 days away? And you just like go, because there's no scale, which is that. Mm-hmm. And then when you start walking, you go like, and then this rock comes close to you very fast. That means it's a small rock close by. The other rock, or the other sort of mountain stuff, that stays on the horizon, doesn't change at all. It must be a big mountain far away. See, now that is what you learn by walking. So you know how we walk, like one step at a time, we fall in, like falling forwards a little bit. And that's not even the interesting part. The interesting part is that you suddenly start to understand how big you are. So scale, and the understanding of the space and public space, for me, it starts there, that you actually use the space to recognize yourself. It's like you see yourself from the perspective of the space. You could also say, you look at the mountain, you go, oh my God, there's a waterfall. Look at that. Is that a waterfall? Yeah, that's a waterfall. And then you see, oh, look, the water is falling really slow. That must be a tall waterfall really far away. Or the waterfall falls out like this, There's a small waterfall close by. In that case, the water is walking, right? The moving, the temporal sort of accountability to space is on the water falling, because water falls with the same speed everywhere on the Earth, and gravity and so on. So, and you can suddenly feel, oh, that means my body is this big, according to that. I could go on about this topic. There's a whole semester in my school right there. But the point is now then, if you go from here, and this is a picture of me dancing, and this is also a picture of me dancing, and the Danish translation would be, I cannot stop. That's not me on the picture there, it's me on the small picture. It's like some of the small pictures of me. I'm not gonna show it to you.
Yeah, point it out, please.
Are you?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I don't know if we'd recognize
I wonder
it.
if there's a kind of a laser or something. Is there? Thank God. No. So this is me actually over there with the round glasses. Oh, it's also me there. Yeah, there's a few of me over there.
This?
Yeah. So this is interesting because I came from Iceland and I was good at hiking, right? And I was not really particularly interested in hiking, but that's the only thing I could really do. But then I was suddenly confronted in 82, believe it or not, in 82, that I was confronted with some mannequins in a show store, and they just stood there, and they moved like a robot. And I was like, I've seen the light. And I was just hitting puberty. I was a little late. I was like almost 15, so I was a little late. But I was just like, oh my God. So I went home to the countryside where I lived with my mother, and I just stood up next morning, and I did not move like a robot. So what happens is, again, you start to realize that spatiality and the sort of way you can divide this is like 6 robot steps, 2 to the left and then up, and then the milk. 1 year later, 2 years later, I became the Scandinavian champion in being sort of physically immersed into space. And that's kind of funny and all of that, but it's also quite interesting because what happened is that when you stand on the street as a street performer, and that was how largely the sort of the real people, they stood on the street. It was like not just like, so I was on the street and with a cardboard, and I'm not joking, cardboard, ghetto blaster, and I can see now it's a little more complex with how everything is organized, right? I'd never been to New York. MTV didn't exist, if you can imagine. There was nothing, like a mobile phone didn't exist. There was like nothing. VHS was not existing. It was Betacam, right? So it was so hard, and finally we got a beta tape of Rocksteady Crew and some shots. And that was like completely life-changing for me. I stood on the street and I learned very quickly, and there's a few smart people with me, and they knew about miming, Marcel Marceau, and political street theater and so on. They knew if you did like this, then everybody looks over there, and if you did like this, everybody looks there, and suddenly you realize, oh my God, I got this space, right? And I felt suddenly I could relativize the elasticity of the buildings. I could sort of turn and bend and push and pull. So I became very confident about space. Later I've learned, of everything from Yvonne Reiner to Merce Cunningham. But that is exactly what they did. So interestingly, also detailed, I will keep that short, ballet, la 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 la, right? That's about weightlessness, frictionlessness, Swan Lake, right? Where breakdance is about friction, it's about resistance, it's about power in the sense of
tension, putting things in tension.
Explicitation of what is not visible, but it is there. Right? It's the wind against you and you're blowing around and so on. So it was very interesting because it was about making explicit what was invisible or making visible what was invisible, like the window, right? You can just sort of see. And so when I went to art school, I started studying space and public space. And I had a very strong sense of physical. I didn't know at the time, because I was like, oh, it's so embarrassing. I was dancing breakdance. I'm not going to tell anyone. I didn't tell anyone. It was like so embarrassing.
Well, clearly it's in the news.
No,
I think
but this is not.
out.
This is just but there's nobody in the art school would read these papers. No, but what I cannot say is so important. Just like in 92, a movie called Wild Style came out, which was Fab Five Freddy. Fab Five Freddy in 2000 and when we did the Marciano exhibition.
That was 18.
Yeah, 2018. It's nice. 2018, Fab Five Freddy comes to my show, and he founded Yo Raps. And you cannot believe how revolutionizing it was when suddenly there was something called MTV, and I had been for years dancing and hoping to get a clip for something, right? And you know, suddenly everything then changed, and there was rap music was accessible, and this is a little more complex. I won't go too much into detail, but it gave me a very strong sense of physicality in sort of owning my own agency with regards to what space is. You can do that in other ways of dancing too. So Fab Five Freddy made Wild Style, the movie. It was funded from Germany and a little bit from Britain. In America, you can never get any money in America for Wild Style, but it's a fantastic movie. You can see it. It's an underground documentary about the hip hop and dance culture and DJs and so on.
But maybe we'll connect that back to something we talked about was contiguous knowledge, right? So the ideas of something being so vast, both in sort of a nanotechnology or even thinking about big data, that it's contiguous. You make it touch a point that is, you know, palpable to you and your sense of viscerality and thinking about distance or scale. But I want to pull you back now. You've mentioned VHS, Betacam. You're giving us a whole media archaeology literally right here in the last 5 minutes. But basically, one of the things I want to make, you know, connect back to is that this project, Lifeworld, connects to your processual thinking about mutability of space and the mutability of media, showing us how images are shaped less by what kind of format they are, right? Like 16 millimeter or Betacam, and how they behave, whether they're social, stable, conversely static, and now blurred, right? So you've talked about the blur as a type of softness, slowness, even a tenderness. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you think you're advancing blur now as a way to kind of counteract the kind of emphasis on precision and focus.
Yeah, thank you for rescuing me out of that. I could go on for hours. Oh, Fab Five Freddy! Oh my God, I was just you know, he went up to Pennsylvania today to kind of swing the vote for Harris in Harris today. So that's why he's not here. He says hi. See now, the thing is, right around then, I decided I wanted to be an artist, and what maybe says it in a good way is Jenny Holzer also around then did this famous billboard on Times Square, "Protect me from what I want."
I think you have a slide.
Do I have a slide of it?
Yeah, maybe. You want to walk through some of the images?
No, let's see. No, do we have? I don't think so. Do I?
No.
No, we don't. No, we took it out.
Oh, this is the, yeah.
Okay, can I just do like this? No.
You know.
So can I just say, protect me from what I want. And I was like thinking, wow, my God, that I completely identify with, because I can see that I'm being, you know, postmodernly like attacked with consumerism. And I was right about to apply to art school. And of course, it was like the end of everything. And it taught me to be critical and to be defensive, protect me from what I want. Now, I went to Times Square and I was working with CIRCA in London, and we talked about it at great length at my studio and studied it. See, well, what is our need? What is our unmet need, right? It's like NVC, non-violent communication. What need has not been met for us, right? We feel unseen, we feel not met, we feel not heard, not acknowledged, maybe. And to go back to public space, what does a public space offer? It offers us to feel included. It's a hospitable space that reflects the same values that we have, democratic values that we think we have about inclusion, hospitality, gentleness, meeting somebody we don't know and actually getting to know them, becoming friends, even though we are different, right? So we think we have all these high values of public space. The public space is relative. Now suddenly there's this interest in the public space, which just means you have a city, urban planning, then you have the private sector, they come in, they take what they need, all the good spots. And then everything that is left is now the public space, right? So sadly, it's not like the public, like public money or public the public sector. It's not like they go in and say, we need that, and then the private sector can get the rest. It's like, where does the sort of shopping malls go? No, we could maybe also then say, okay, this is the space that we own. We pay tax, or most of us. And in that way, what is public is actually what we expect to reflect our values. The idea of protecting ourselves, I'm stitching it all together, this is like weaving. The idea of public, sort of protecting ourselves is a kind of defensiveness. And I wonder whether this is the right response, all this defensiveness. Also in this, I promised myself not to mention the thing, right, in a couple of days. But, you know, there's so much defensive, people are so defensive. Maybe we can sort of exercise a degree of lowering our defensiveness. And what happens then? And what do we expect for public space then? We expect it to acknowledge our vulnerability. Because when I'm not defensive, I'm exposed. And I'm, you know, I can be attacked and I can be questioned. I can be, you know, you can be held accountable for stuff. So the blurring is now every pixel normally on this giant tanning studio called Times Square. Every pixel is optimized for capital gain, right? Every tiny little fucking 2x2 micron is optimized for the profitability of who is at the other end. And it's a spectacle, and people love it, right? And we go there, and we go like, oh my God, consumerism is fucking great. and of course, the issue is I have become numb. It's like numb, it's like meta-defensiveness, it's like kind of hyper-defensiveness. And we're just like happy clowns. So if I don't remove the light, because there's also the street light, there's like almost no street lights because the lights are on all the time anyway, so it's just the public sector will save the money and take out the street lights. If now we just have the screens, but we remove all content, like it's been done in art history again and again, right? Then suddenly blurring everything makes it, I think, a very different experience because it's soft, it slows. And we know if it slows down, it opens up for unpredictable situations. It opens up for even meeting someone. And it is not doing it to sell us something which is not there, but at some network somewhere or some kind of store somewhere to put on your feet, or all the things that we are constantly bombarded and grilled with. No, suddenly the softness becomes about tenderness. So I say, without disagreeing with Jennifer, with Holzer, unprotect me, make me vulnerable, and lower my defensiveness. No, lower my avoidance of pain. Right? I am gonna do one rare thing. I'm gonna feel how I fucking feel. And then I'm going to take the risk or be courage enough to have enough courage to claim public space back and say, I exist, I'm present, this is my space. The spatiality of it, the landscape of it, or the breakdancing in it is actually where I can exist. It is not, I'm not in a bloody tanning studio where everything is being fried, right? I am actually able to be a person. And I might even meet someone who might not even agree with me, and I can still be friends. My God, what kind of space is that? And that is what we expect from public. That's why we pay tax, and the tax is spent on sidewalks and pedestrian and bicycle lanes and all this stuff, right? We pay for it, right? So we would want it to be actually ours and not some kind of networks. So the relativity of reality, you said, right? That is where it is. The relativity of public space, if you lean into it, it actually changes. But it does require, I believe, to also be less defensive and have the courage to be, well, emotional if you want. And I don't mean dumb, like dumb emotional, but emotional in the sense that you have accountability to how you feel, to how you do walk the talk. Or, you know, there is actually a meaningful agenda when it comes to space.
I want to pull it back a little bit and talk more specifically about the materiality of it, right? So thinking about an urban framework, and you've picked, again, these very hostile architectures, right? From the not offering a place to sit, or you can have it as aggressive as, you know, embedding metal studs to move people along, right? And then adding to the hostility of the environment is the onslaught of visual noise in these spaces. what in the mid-2000s we were talking about is described in anodyne terms as a flow of images has now become weaponized, aimed at disinformation, disorientation. And can you elaborate on what it means to soften or mute images in public space at a time when GIFs, tweets, and memes basically dictate public discourse, and that's what counts as speech acts?
So we can
This
say...
is my day job.
No. So the title of this piece here at the Architecture Gallery in MoMA in 2007 is "I only see things when they move." It was like, if there's no movement, there's no time. It's enough of that. And here is a rainbow that I can walk through on top of a museum in Denmark, Aarhus. It's called your Rainbow Panorama. And you know, when you walk through it, your after images adjust, and it gets kind of psychedelic because you go like, ooh, blue. Then I have orange after images. Then I go from the blue into the green. You know, blue-green is a rainbow. But you have orange after images. So orange and green, that becomes murky brown, and you stand there, what's going on? But your eyes react to the green making red, so your brown is becoming red, and the green is becoming more and more green, and you go like this, what's going on? What is happening? So walking what activates the eye. So I'm just kind of catching up with you, right? So now the texture of space and the sort of the spatiality of it. We live, and this is now me generalizing a bit. Maybe if I can do it without generalizing. There is this fear of doubt. There's a fear of openness. My show in Los Angeles at LA MoCA is called Open. So it's so funny that the banners by the bus stop, LA MoCA, open. So the kind of like uncertainty. Like imagine like imagine an election if somebody was so honest and say, I don't know. I'm uncertain. Maybe why don't we have a look at that? Or a CEO who says, yeah, maybe. See, now I would like to claim that being a success, because we get to space. Everything is organized so that there is no doubt, right? Traffic regulations. It's not like kind of, and I get that with cars and pedestrians. I get that as like kind of bluish, no, greenish, yellowish, reddish. That's not working. But imagine now if the power structures, every court building, every fucking library building looks like a court building, and the police station looks like a military camp. See, power is of course embedded in, ingrained in everything, and it's just not just there. It goes on and on from lights to surveillance to. There is no room in which uncertainty is being nurtured. That room is what we call the cultural space. And God forbid the culture would be on the street in a sense of hospitality. You are welcome. We don't really know who you are, but why don't we just slowly find out? But let's take time and be uncertain. So the sort of the grain is, now there is a way of doing that. I'm sorry, so here we have our senses, right? I'm here, I have my senses, I'm looking in this or that direction. There is something called the central perspective. My senses have for 1,000 years been cultivated to see things in a certain way. I can, by understanding the lines, I can sort of triangulate stuff, right? I have a way of seeing which one could say has to do with architecture since the Renaissance. It's like when I was young, that was how it sounded. But the thing is, imagine if there is no vanishing point. Imagine if the vanishing point is something you make as you go. Maybe the shape of things is relative to the way you use them. Maybe the world is actually dependent on your engagement. So let's now go one step further. Being uncertain invites you into being a co-producer, because it asks you, this is maybe an artwork on Times Square tonight. My family is like, maybe an artwork. Tomorrow is for sure an artwork, because then it opens. Right? But it's like relatively sure. I'm quite sure it's art, to be honest. And this is interesting because it actually asks you to finish the work. I'm handing over the responsibility to become a co-producer. Unlike normally, you would be a consumer, like, right? So one could maybe say, a way of looking at this, can we change the spaces so that the ownership of the reality is decentralized, so that you, the user of the space, become a co-producer, the co-owner. Can I deregulate into the user's hands? Of course, this is largely called the cultural sector also, right? We would like to suggest that the experience of an artwork is a integral part of the artwork, but we'd also like to see that applied onto the real world, so that when you are in a space, you go like, how long and big is this space really welcoming, or is it not welcoming? Well, if I engage, I feel welcome. If I just want to consume it, I might as well just go down to the mall and be fed for like a goose, So in that way.
But maybe I'll just interject and say, though, when we were talking about your exhibition, thinking about ocular proof, thinking about the ways of witnessing, these things are not universal, right? So the people who are co-producing with you, everyone's standing on uneven ground. And so maybe I'll bring it back to a quote you said in 2021 when we were doing that conversation. We live in an age of the proliferation of lenses, not only in the surveillance cameras that pepper our urban space, but also the hands of activists who are aiming them back as the instruments of power. And that you are interested in this idea of the panopticon, right? The decentralization of the authority of the lens. And so now that everyone's carrying lenses around, or a privileged few are carrying lenses around through your devices, the question does arise. Who does own that narrative? How is it shaped? How is it being interrupted, accumulated, composited, right? And how does the shift of focus within the locus of attention now really has shifted away from a heavily mediated set of trafficked spaces to now becoming, sort of streams or one-offs. And likewise, just to acknowledge that these are not universal positions. Not everybody comes in the equal position of power, and that, the idea of moving beyond completing a work and saying, no, there's a real imbalance about not only about we can have the ocular proof, but the weight of narrative and the weight of witnessing has a different balance.
Yeah, and the ocular proof, just for you to know, is so George Floyd, somebody filmed it on a mobile phone, right? So that became an ocular proof in a court case, which changed everything. And it's only, if I understand it right, it's only so long ago that was even brought into legislation, that was even possible, that a person with a mobile phone could be used as a proof in a court case in a legislative way. Mm. So there's a decentralization from the panopticon in the center of what do you call that, a jail? It's not called anymore, but so that one policeman could look at thousands what's the right word when you're in jail today?
Like evidence, or?
Yeah, but there's a surveillance. One person can see 1,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. So, and now there's a situation where that has changed. 1,000 people, they can see everything, and now the question is. See, I was just say, so my blurring of Times Square is an interest in sort of softening, tenderness, vulnerability, mm-hmm. and I believe public space can hold that, because I believe in public sharing things, right? So now that there's a more granular discussion, is like, inside of that public space, there's tons of other stuff going on, and one can say one of the good things is that we all have a camera of exceptional quality in our pocket, most likely. And that is not everywhere in the world. It's not always the same, and I get that. But the point is that there's a huge decentralization where you can now actually, as I understood, an artist here tonight who might ask a question later, so secretly prepared, where they sort of where you can say the public or the sort of the public the people can reverse the surveillance. Because we have enormous amount of surveillance happening everywhere. Now, this is a huge discussion, and there's the blurring of faces. But for me, there's a difference. My blurring is one of encouraging to co-own and co-produce and talk together and work together, and not separate and anxiety provoke people into more hostile and fear-based actions. Imagine if there is surveillance everywhere. That, of course, is a reaction to Simpsons, and they keep saying, well, there is sexual crime, there's racial crime, so we put surveillance to prevent that. Instead of working on the cause of that crime, they use that as a preventional, and of course, that's very sad. because suddenly that government-owned surveillance is now outsourced to private companies, and they profit on that, on that data, which is actually our data because it's public, it's our street. They sell it, they do AI and facial recognition, and they start to monitor, and these private companies become AI companies, and then they start being sold to people who are into AI and who make space rockets, and they also want to be politicians. See, now, you have suddenly a slide where this question of who owns the camera on the street in terms of when does a street or public space become hostile, or when does it become hospitable? It's a little bit like a dinner. Do you invite people to come to a dinner, just to sort of scale it down, where people are different, or do you always invite people who are always agreeing on everything? It's like the same. It's like inviting the same person 5 times. And now the question is, are you good at hosting dinners where people disagree without freaking out and becoming a huge argument and crying the next day because half your friends are lost? Because it's a great art form to host a great dinner and coming together. And imagine if people go home from the dinner and say, my God, that was an amazing dinner. I didn't agree with anyone. We had a huge discussion, but fantastic. Because we did not become enemies. It is possible. It's like, even in America, I think, the thing that the idea, and we can then ask, where are the spaces where we can meet with someone who says, wow, I love that. Do you see that blue sky there? And it's just like, wow, I really love it. And I go like, ugh, that was terrible. It was absolutely horrible. And we could still could be my next wife. Do you understand? It's like, and that disagreement might just be the thing, do you know?
Well, maybe I'll just pull back a little bit. You mentioned things about, I'm just gonna bring us back a little bit here to think about, since working with you in 2006 was the year Google image search starts. We have ChatGPT now. AI image generator tools continue to spread, focusing on the reality quotient of digital images, right? The degree to which they accurately reproduce the optical conditions of the external world through technical refinement, based on very limited and very biased training sets. We know that. So your Lifeworld blur does the opposite. Being blurry, fuzzy, uncertain, pointing to the underlying mechanisms that make a more humane image, maybe. On a theoretical level, we could say the blur is like Alexander Kluge's idea of the subjunctive image in the process of becoming, not yet announced, fully formed, or one that evokes memory, that it has a different kind of ethos to it.
Yeah.
And especially now that you've picked places, or that the project is instantiated in places in which you're interpolating that directional advertising image. So talk a little bit about, not just with the idea of surveillance and control and consumerism, but the ways in which, like I said, something that doesn't exist yet, right? That it's still constantly being human, failed, potentially full of dropouts.
So there's 4 kinds of blurs in our blur. Mm-hmm. I mentioned one already, it's the time blur, but it's not only on the screen. You will see people on the screens, but they are not time blurred. They walk normal speed. There's also depth blur, and we used an AI machine to learn machine learning. How does the computer know that? The computer doesn't know the film of Times Square that this building is further away. It's just like a building, right? It doesn't tell, but it can tell from machine learning, oh, it is further away. So we can apply a depth blur, which is like fog, right? The pilot in the plane says, I have 300 meters visibility. The visual is a reference to distance. And then another blur is reversing colors away from well-known colors, like certain brands has patented certain colors and so on. So we just reversed them and took all kinds of other blurs. And then there's the sort of unknown blur, the secret ingredient. I forgot what it was actually. But the thing is, so in a sense, when we say blurry, it's not just blurred. It's like it's very, very finely sculpted. There's space, and there is very much the reference to the space in which you stand. So to answer your question, I think I'm interested in the way we, as the user, co-owner, producer, the sharing of the space, I'm very interested in how do we actually actively, and this is important, actively exercise our choices of the space. I have a choice of actively engaging, and by doing so, I change the space. When do we feel like engaging? If we are not encouraged, because we do not do anything. If everything is done for us, so here, buy that, then you're great. Okay, great, I buy it, so I'm great. Now, something much more complex is like, how do I live my life in accountability to my values in spatial terms? And that requires that you are denumbifying, or that you actually exercise the degree of sensitivity that holds you accountable to time and space. And therefore, the very precise blurring is like a little bit more blur. No, that's too much. A little bit less blur. So we went at great length into staring at this blur, like this. Also on the retransfer screen, we really worked very hard to make it such that you go like, oh, this is out of focus. Or what's going on? Oh my God, I know this place. So see, now this is doubt in a proactive, hospitable, and quite beautiful way. It's much more beautiful than the ads. I'm not against beauty at all. I like to take beauty. Why would we give it to the ads and the fashion and industry and all of that? No, we're much better at it anyway. It's so ugly.
No, but I think it's important to think about it. That's the gesture is to move against the kind of calibration or the way that commercial software is often calibrated for image refinement, precision, to actually sharpen and crystallize rather than to soften and mute, or rather to erase those composited lines, right? So here we are, your work has always, for the last 30 years, really been interested in these perceptual experiences that were often based on lens-based modes of image capture, mirroring, photography, right? The idea of those kinds of lens-based. And now you're moving into something that's more about computational behaviors, expansion, compression, blurring, 4 different types of blurring, telling us much more about the long digital age or the slog of the long digital age than maybe digital work itself does. And in this way, one of the things I'm interested in your practice is the way that you often take on events of complexity, like we talked about, scalar crises. They're not individual, they're linked, right, constantly. You're interested in not necessarily picturing or representing those things, but pointing to different types of behaviors around them. And so one of the questions I had for you was a little bit like, for somebody who has the technical prowess, the financial viability to work on certain scales, just because it may be technologically feasible, you don't. Your work is oftentimes very calibrated for real-time experience, and even if it addresses an audience or a collective or a crowd, it's often aimed at an individual. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that kind of distinction.
Yeah, but not the individual on the expense of the collective, but an individual as a coherent participant in something we call society or societal systems, so typically Scandinavian in that way. I think that on a smaller scale, because for me this is an analog question. There's a very interesting experiment, by the way. We have 2 lenses, talking about lenses, right? We have 2 lenses here, and the funny thing is, they are not very connected. There is an optical nerve that goes to the brain, but other than that, they are kind of free floating around in the skull, right? Halloween. So, and there's a very funny experiment. It's a famous neuroscientist. You can see your own sensing, and now be careful, don't poke your finger into your eye. See, if you go under the eye, right underneath here, you can try to do it. Don't in the eye, underneath in the skin, and then look at me, and then press it. And do you see how everything is gooey? You can see the lens, right? It's interesting. Normally we just look through it. You can't see it. And the element here is that if we can allow people to see that that is not reality, it is a construction of reality, then people are also very likely to co-produce in making the reality, because it's going to be constructed anyway. There is no inner truth to be found after all. It's also, the idea of truth is also a model, it's also construction. So we live in times where there is opportunities for sort of claiming back or taking over or sort of decentralizing things, it's very complex, because I think, we have such enormously generous ideas about how amazing we are, right? If somebody falls on the bike, I for sure will walk over and see if the person hurt themselves, for sure. But who do you think I am? But then you're on the street that late night and everybody's like, there's a bloody fucking Halloween going on, and then somebody falls on the bike and you go like, oh my God, is that real blood or is it like some Halloween blood? And this is a drunk person. No, and is somebody looking? Or should I go over and check? And suddenly we are in the real space of our idea space. So to be present to that real space and then to admit, wow, I'm insecure. There's a lot of unforeseeable. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have to do it, and then also have the courage to say, I'm vulnerable. I'm out of my defense, out of my comfort. So the kind of the finesse, I think, lies in acknowledging the specificity of this particular situation. I have a slide addressing that. I would like to come back to this, but can I just go to this one here? Oh, here. Can I just say this one here? So while the artist Ai Weiwei, it's funny to say, Ai Weiwei was sitting in house arrest in China, and I was talking to him, let's make a digital work of art, because you can't make anything you can get out of China right now. So we made this homepage called Moon, 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 because Moon was taken, and Moon, Moon was taken. So Moon, 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 Moon. And it's a graffiti. It's a graffiti, and I said, "How should I do it?" So we did, and people did drawings, and it was fun. We made a drawing machine, and it was a good fun, because he was not able to do much, because he didn't have his passport, right? He was in his own home, not all the time, but he was also in a cell at some point. And I said, so now a problem came. I'm sitting in Germany with my amazing studio team, we did all the work and so on, and then people started making swastikas on it. And I called Ai Weiwei and said, listen, there's a fucking swastikas all over the moon now. No, but that's great, he says. Yeah, it's freedom of speech. And I said, well, this is a little bit, it's actually illegal in Germany, because there's a regulatory thing, you cannot do hate speech. It's a law. Oh, he don't care. It was like, are you an artist or not an artist? I was like, come on, that's not the point. But what was interesting, Ai Weiwei was sitting in China imprisoned. For him, freedom of speech was different. I was sitting in Germany enjoying the kind of privilege of being able to go out and buy a coffee if I want. And for me, it was important that there is a regulatory way, there's laws about hate speech, about a certain type of crimes. If you can hit somebody by verbally accusing them of things. In the brain, it's the same thing. Violence and verbal violence is the same thing. So even freedom of speech is relative to the context, right? And I don't mean to sort of make a mill out of it, but 6 years ago, Erdogan in Turkey used democracy, it's a democratic country, used democracy to vote against democracy, and it was very interesting. So the power went to the president, he changed the constitution by virtue of voting. Everybody said, that's great, give him more power. So in Europe, people were like, that's wild. They use democracy to make it less democratic, which is interesting, a thing that you might be facing here also, right? It's very interesting. And this is such a paradox, but the paradox is something else. You cannot do it the other way. You cannot take an autocratic principle and make it more democratic. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And that's where you say, once the privatization of the cameras on the street and the surveillance has gone into the centralized hands of surveillance, it is impossible to make it public again and claim back the public street. You cannot we got 3 minutes before midnight for a month to claim softness. But there's 23 hours and 57 minutes where there's no softness a day, right? And bless culture sector for leaning into a little bit of softness and gooiness here and there. But this is actually the reality of the problem. And then you take your AI question, you just pour that on top of that. And can I do a test? Okay, then I make a
Well, and then I would say that...
No, I want to just make one last question. It doesn't matter, you have plenty of time. Listen, okay, everybody, I have a question for you, everybody. Imagination, you are now sick, very sick, and you need help. You need to go to the hospital, otherwise you die. So I need you to answer honestly. I'm not going to criticize anybody afterwards or anything. So you are in one of two countries. You're either in India or in China. I'm going to ask you now, you need a hospital, you're sick. Which country would you be in? Everybody who's in China, put up the hand. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody in India? Okay. Much less people in India.
And then the undecided voters.
Yeah, then there's doubt.
Which we
there's
don't
doubt.
understand.
You don't have to. I love the people who say no. No, but this is now interesting, right? This is interesting. China is an autocratic and India is a democratic country, right? So we, when it comes to us, choose an autocratic country because we feel more safe because the system is better. So we'd rather have Russia, an autocracy, than we would have democracy. That is maybe not perfect. And it's very different. It's very interesting because it's a highly individualized situation. But when you're sick, now you take AI and pour into that. And the AI goes, yeah, well, of course it's China. What the fuck? It's not going to have some kind of democracy run stuff. This has never worked. Look at India, right? See, now we have a situation where the surveillance, the cameras, the democracy, and I talk about hospitality. Soon we're going to have the street regulations, everything legislative is run by AI. Mm-hmm. Soon there are going to be like rocket company owners running the pedestrian safety by AI and surveillance cameras.
Well, I think you're ruining my other point then, was because I was going to say that honestly, as cynical as I am, one of the reasons I come back to your work, and I think many of us in the room do over and over again, is this idea because you're never dystopic, right? It's not a dystopian vision, and instead you kind of help us apprehend our contradictory place in the world as both the progenitors and the exhausted casualties of scalar crises, right? From climate catastrophe to new and renewed geopolitical conflict, deepening class stratification, and like we were talking about, a codependency on the very machines and technologies and AI that are ushering in a new dark age where human-produced culture seems to be, or already is, on the way to becoming unsustainable or obsolete. So, thinking about the ways that your work underscores complexity and complicity in our everyday actions, and helping us think about the ways in which we exist in these infrastructures, and that your idea of scalar humanism, the kind of connection, like you mentioned, the kind of interest in softness and vulnerability or uncertainty, is a reminder that while we can never really fully opt out of these systems, we don't always have to think like them. And I'm hoping that, in these kind of closing moments, you can show us, there was a couple of videos that you wanted to cue and show and share too that talk a little bit about those ideas of complexity and complicity.
Yeah, but I will. But the first thing I want to say though is that the worst we can do is underestimate ourselves. The second worst thing is to take democracy for granted. Like, it's going to be fine, because it's not. See, and then once you are there, I think there is an opportunity in saying, well, if we are not to be underestimated, we are maybe smart. Maybe not the Western world part of the world, but maybe the global majority is pretty smart, right? Which is, for instance, the Nigerian philosopher and recovering psychologist, because he studied at Sorbonne in France, is Olafur, the amazing thinker, and I really can recommend him as a source. So he says the problem is not, the client or the therapist in that case. No, the problem is the room for the fucking client. That's the whole idea of the room is the problem. Or, he says much more poetically, the Western world has a problem. They see a camel in the desert. No, they don't see that the desert is presenting itself through a camel. Right? So the way we can actually alter ways of seeing, and we have, great people like Donna Haraway and Anna Zink, and people who are taking also a mixture of skills across social sciences, natural sciences, and cultural sciences, or culture, or art and culture, or Natasha Myers, STS, microbiologist, First Nation anthropologist, Canadian First Nation people, and dancer and a photographer, right? This mix. These people are seeing things where vulnerability becomes a force, an asset, a kind of a fierce thing. It's not like, oh, I'm vulnerable, but I'm fucking vulnerable, right? And in that sense, so I don't want to say I'm hopeful, because this is like such a weird thing to say nowadays, but the truth of the matter is I have faith in people and not really much else. The experiments I've done here very much is about that type of, optimism is right, but I'm confident that people are not gonna just give up, right? So
If you say so.
I disagree.
Well.
I agree. No. So no, I'm just saying. So this was a museum in Basel, and there is a facade there normally, a glass facade, so you can look in on the Monets and the fancy paintings in there. And there's a little pond, a lily pond, of course, Monet. You can't lily pond outside, right? It's the Byerly
The Byler in Basel.
Yeah, Renzo Piano is the architect. So I took off the glass facade and I lifted the water in the pond, and it flooded the galleries, like all the way into the museum. And I dyed it green, and that was good fun, because the inside and the outside mixed, and more than humans, such as insects and birds and cats and dogs and so on, they also went to the museum. And the interesting thing was the blurring of that, the softness, the tenderness. The museum became vulnerable because they could go at night and have a rave party, right? And they did, because it was during COVID, and there was like no way you could go anyway. And so here the museum is handing over the space and say, we are open. That's actually open, right? So and this is also a blurring. This is a foggy room. Do you see it from down there? Yeah, foggy room. And this is interesting because you walk around in the fog and say, oh, it's green. Where did I get in? Oh my God, this is intense. And then you go red. Oh no, I'm going to green. Oh, there it is, the door. So you gradually blind yourself, you lose navigation, but then you get it again in a different way. We are not done. We can sense ourselves sensing, right? Introspection, structuralism. And in that way, and this project here, of course, this Tate Modern, the space was half inside, half outside. There was free to get into the lobby, and sometimes one show was free. Otherwise, everything cost money. So I said, why don't we make this space a part of the street? And British, in London, this would be maybe an opportunity. And we had this brilliant idea, it was someone at my studio, I'm sure, to have the weather from BBC 4 every night at 7 done at the Tate. It's like the social media time of this analog social media was like the weather guy doing, and here at the Tate, it is sunny as usual. And then suddenly all these millions of people who has not been in an art museum before, they go, we have to go and see this awkward sun. And then they lay down on the floor. But what is interesting, up at the Donald Judd show on the 4th floor, was like the Donald Judd, right? There was all these boxes, and so on, and people are like, ooh, boxes. Then they laid down, and the curator, they say, what the fuck? You can't just lay down here on the floor. Right, and people and the fire department came and said, no, you cannot have people laying around up in the galleries, but down there it's okay, because it's a part of the artwork. So this is interesting, this softness, right, the gentle sort of nurturing of people's self-confidence, and there's such dangers in the escalation of AI out of control. And as I said, AI is not going to be humanizing. It's not going to be a humanist.
I was just going to ask them to say thank you, join me in thanking you for being very human, very uncertain, very fuzzy, very warm. Thank you, Olafur. That was very
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. You're both too sweet. Thanks a lot.
So if there were microphones set up for folks who wanted to ask questions.
Hello.
Hi, thank you.
Hey.
Hi, great to see you.
Good to see you as well. I kind of wrote down my question. It's not even a question, really, but it will be by the end of it, hopefully.
Say your name.
My name is Brandon. I'm an artist here in New York. Very interested in these ideas of counter-surveillance. And one thing I was thinking about as you were speaking today was the ways in which image fidelity doesn't necessarily equate to an image's value or power. Like over time, that has become lessened. The fact that you have cell phone footage, this like low image, this non-cinematic image that has been the catalyst time and time again for action, for like this real life movement. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And so within our landscape of intense image fatigue, there's a sort of comfort in the shadows, in the blur, in the unsurveilled crevices. And so I was thinking about you talking about breakdancing, and it made me think a lot about the Robert Moses Parkway and the birth of hip hop, like the way in which like these young Black and Puerto Rican kids got crammed together, and that caused this like flashpoint that created hip hop, rapping, like breakdancing, all these things. And so I'm at this point where I'm thinking about that like sort of adaptation and that vulnerability that comes with that. And I'm wondering, where do you see that happening today, both online or in person? Like, what are those spaces? Where are those places that it's happening? For you, at least your outlook. You know.
I think in a certain way, so I think we see new things and we see new ways of seeing things, like the camel in the desert. We, before the Renaissance, there was the cross garden in a cloister that defined a space, but there were the monks or the nuns, in each of them, right? They looked at this cross park, a garden with the columns around, and there was probably a functional herbal garden for medicine, and maybe for cooking and for herbs and so on. What space did they see? Because it was before Renaissance. We don't know. We can't see it. This is a kind of a blindness that I think the acknowledgement of what we cannot see. There's something I think that is, if I can give young people credit, they are very good at seeing what they cannot see, like the blind spots. Edward Glissant, the philosopher, he talks about the right to opacity, right? So opacity is the right word, yeah. And what I think he means is that there are certain things, because they are so different in the way that, and the Western world is always like, the fucking Western world always thinks that it knows how to see everything, but we can't. It's opaque. Right? Opacity. It is, now I have to be careful to credit Glissant, because this is such a genius way of thinking. Acknowledging that we cannot see everything is also embracing the other. And I feel that the discursive work happening in America, identity politics, decolonialization, the theory that is applied on life, is a very interesting opportunity to sort of rethink the systems. The decentralization, like your own work, Brandon, and the way you, as little as we know each other, still the idea of reversing the surveillance so that it is the people surveilling the state. It was like fucking genius. Nobel Prize. And I'm serious. This reversing the way we think. Bayo Kamalafi says he spends more time as unlearning what the Sorbonne taught him in order to be a French psychologist, a therapist, right? Than he spent on thinking what he want to think about, because the Western world has taken his brain, and he speaks so eloquently about it. I see a much bigger flexibility. When I saw this robot, it was a guy called Pierre, who had been at high school in America. And Pierre in Copenhagen, his mother was actually Puerto Rican. So he identified. Mm-hmm. And I saw Pierre standing in the window and I said, my God, the guy is a genius. And that spoke to me. And I later then came to understand that I admit to have appropriated some type of identity politics in terms of developing a dance. I then came from a street theater with Marcel Marceau and another, because I just did not know what dance. And now it's just, this I think is knowledge that is much more available, and this gives rise for a new type of criticality. For me, dance was a criticality, like a friction, the friction of space.
And I might just throw out another category or another space where this kind of interpolation can happen is, we talk a lot about the ways in which facial recognition and biometrics are calibrated for white skin, going back to an early history of Kodak film and photography and Shirley cards. And the question then is less about building a model or a mechanism to be able to trace and facially recognize different pigment, but how about to evade and not have that to begin with, right? So that's another kind of interpolation too, where it's not just, it's kind of thinking less about this idea of, like you said, optimization or calibration, and rather one of a decision to opt out. Mm-hmm.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This artwork here is more anecdotal, just briefly. This is a headset artwork, this stuff you can put on your head. Vision Pro and what is it called? Oculus, yeah. Thanks. And so I made a work of art. What it is that you are seeing is that there is a pixelation, there's a pixels in this thing, right? You have pixels. And I made very thin stripes. And when you look at very thin stripes through an Oculus or sort of a headset, you see the moire. And it's so funny because what you actually see is the noise, the kind of I almost said cerebral noise, but the Newton rings or the moire, right? The interference between two sets of lines. And this means that if you move, everything changes. So there is a motoric, muscular, like you're storing the experience in your body, even though it's on your headset. So the idea was to see that you are not just looking at an illusion, right? You can see that you're looking at a construction. You can see the headset from the inside, because normally you just look at a fucking dolphin that is swimming next to you, go, ooh, there's a dolphin. But I promise you, there is no dolphin. It's not. It's the dolphin problem. And to see that you are not really seeing a dolphin, it makes the dolphin much more real, if you know what I mean. And this is what I mean. The people are not dumb.
Do we want to invite another question? Do we have time for another?
There's one here. Yeah.
Yeah. Just wanted to say thank you. I love the talk. I have a background in psychology and social sciences, and I've always found my brain to be quite intersectional and pulling in different theories. And something that I've been thinking about recently, as I'm part of Gen Z, and there's a lot of discourse around loneliness and isolation and this tension that I think tracks onto this kind of the human condition of wanting to become and individuate, but also belong, and be part of something. And you were mentioning the vulnerability that happens in tenderness in the openness of space, of public space. And I'm curious for you how you differentiate the power of that in a public physical space versus on social media, where there is still some type of public, some type of discourse where it is slightly two-way, but not in real time, not in the same way that, if you will, affords that bumping into that you also pulled in from breakdancing. There's nothing to really bump into in the same physical nowness that exists in real time.
This is a great question. So you can get a job at my studio, because this is exactly what I work on. Now, since a couple of years, I've started studying psychology, not as a real sort of like become a professional, but in order to get inspired. So I've been focusing on internal family system, IFS, as a kind of modus for questioning the kind of nature of how I feel. Right? It's very straightforward. And interestingly, I think as I've come to become better at it, it lends itself to other sort of strings of sort of self-evaluative or self-compassionate practices such as nonviolent communication, the therapeutic arm in NVC, nonviolent communication, Marcel Rosenberg. So now I think one can take some of these sort of systems of thinking about my own, so the construction of my own presence, and apply it onto art. And suddenly a museum becomes very dull. And which means there's a great opportunity for a museum to kind of reconsider its relevance. And you could also ask, why is mental health just like not really a big thing within the whole AI? But I think it will be, because if you're looking at it, I'm looking at it, it's going to happen. Because I think young people and one old person is actually interested in it. And what it means that we are being granted the tool of not investigating, but interrogating the norms of what we ought to do. We can challenge, some people have autism, and the rest has oughtism. We ought to do this and that. And it is I don't know which one is best, right? Because the autism is fucking genius. It's that's a Olafur quote as well. So as to the kind of potential of applied introspection, using your mind, and imagine now in perception theory or in museum display ideology, the museum presenting how they present it, or museum art, cultural institution, theater. Now think if we could decentralize this narrative so that it becomes so everyone has their own narrative. Just like a bit like this fantastic theater play here that is in a building here, and people walk around with the actors, and there's like no stage and audience and so on and so forth. I'm so sorry, I just heard about it, I don't know the name. It sounds so elusive, but there is a theater play running and I think it's Macbeth. It's in a building, and you walk around, and you just see in this former hotel or something. I think there is so much potential, and we are only just starting. And as to what I think culture can be applied to, I think there is no limits. I love to be at Times Square. I love to even though if I only get 3 minutes, I still am excited. I even once worked with a luxury brand, which is on 57th Street, or anyway, same. And I took out the goods and I illuminated the sidewalk, so down the street to people, there's funny light on the street, because that's what the luxury industry does to the sidewalks. They privatize it, right? I think culture can happen everywhere. It's very hard to go into a church and then hang something and say, it's not about religion. That's not gonna, culture cannot do anything, but it is possible to work everywhere. And I'm not, and there's a lot of us, right? Look, there's like a lot of people. We are not a company, right? We are a huge industry, and we don't have a CEO. We are, I wouldn't call it a movement, a slow motion movement. You're supposed to end then saying something really nice.
Well, and I want to just give back props to Pioneer Works and places and having these kinds of conversations here where these can happen. Right now, it used to be just academic institutions or museums where those were like the two places, and then the third place would be the market, right? So now we're looking at these kinds of spaces, like you mentioned, that are triangulating and spreading out the idea of who has the authority and the position or the platform. And I think it's really important to think about these types of spaces that are changing the cultural landscape, that they're not museums or collection spaces. They have residencies, they have invitations, they have an incredible publishing arm here. So there's this idea of kind of a creative diaspora that goes out and that continues to circulate in different ways. And those types of models, I think, are really important in this type of ecology, where it's not set up just as a kind of counter-public or counter-model or an alternative. We have enough alternative spaces, right? So alternative to what? So now we have to really think about, like you said, a generative tension in between these kinds of production spaces.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought also. And I forgot to say, because I have an exhibition at 21st Street and 10th Avenue in a gallery called Tiny Bonacta, and the title of the show is Your Psychosonic Lighted Ensemble. It's like fucking weird. But the beauty, I think, lies in, I am convinced that, I guess I was coming to the point that once we would not be afraid of claim the ownership of reality that the cultural sector actually owns. And I'm just a tiny little fraction of a much bigger thing. And I think there's something so beautiful in this, with great intellectual foresight, endured like yours. And this movement, I think, has great resources. If you look at the return on investment, if you throw money into airplanes or cars or whatever, it's like horrible. Throw money into culture, into theaters and dance and music and art, of course. That's a huge profit in like soft money, right? In soft power, societally cohesion.
Well, you actually taught me that the idea too that you don't have to buy into the scarcity narrative either, right? The kind of self-limiting way of thinking about where art can circulate, or the way that the domains that you're allowed or you're invited or you're expected to produce, operate, or dialogue within. So it's really not necessarily buying into the cultural scarcity model either, right?
Yeah, if people say, I could have done this at home in the garage, I say yes. No, do it. Because I'm actually serious, because this is not about making the impossible possible every day, right? It's actually about that reality is relative. And it's so easy to bend it once you actually bother to have a closer look. You see more.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, because maybe just as a point of closing, this is an ongoing dialogue, so we invite everybody tomorrow to come to Times Square, to come back. The talk and the material will be available at Pioneer Works. So this is, one of the things that I think, being in circulation and in the way that you sort of operate too, that these are not discrete moments, right? Like you said, that they're overlapping and contiguous with each other. So thank you for always being in touch. Thank you for your time and generosity of spirit tonight too, Olafur. So thank you again.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.